Hall, known as Bloombergville. That's the upper left slide. Named after our billionaire mayor, Michael Bloomberg. Bloombergville pulled together activists from the Uncut movement who'd been occupying banks since January, homeless advocates whose actions involved sleeping on the streets, and unions and community groups who protested threatened public sector layoffs and austerity measures proposed in the city's $66 billion budget, which had seen steady increases in its overall size and amounts, but much more of it allocated to debt servicing as the years went by. So the protests involved here called for higher taxes and cuts in subsidies to the big banks and financial institutions that are headquartered in the city. And these activists, now joined by others from Spain, Egypt, and throughout the US, and by that I mean in New York City, continued to meet throughout July and August, holding general assemblies that have come to define the Occupy Wall Street movement and agreeing to their formulation as the 99% against the 1% in the middle of August. There were other signs of spreading international protest in August when London police shot and killed a young black man that they were arresting in Tottenham. Riots subsequently broke out all over England, and according to a recently released study called Reading the Riots, which is a joint program of the Guardian newspaper and the London School of Economics, which is trying to do a consistent sociological study of the causes of the riots. These rioters must also be seen as protesters motivated by anger at poverty, unemployment, inequality, and violent police tactics. So there's a consistency there with what we've seen prior to this in the year. So if one begins to connect the dots between these different events, one sees links that are both direct and indirect. In Egypt, a flagrantly fraudulent national election and police violence. In Tunisia, brutality at the hands of the state following years of unemployment. Troubled economies battered by the global economic downturn. Rising unemployment by the elites, corrupt political elites, and banks and bankers. In the US, the catalyst was economic problems related directly to the 2008 crisis, a sluggish jobless recovery, and greater public awareness of a risk-prone, high-volume, and opaque financial system. Added to that, there was gridlock in the US Congress, which was unable to take decisions in August on raising the debt ceiling, perceptions that the political system was broken, the refusal of political leaders at the local, state, and national levels to consider raising taxes of any kind on corporations and high-income earners. All of these contributed to Occupy Wall Street's backlash. So basically, these people are looking for a new social contract among ordinary people with themselves. And I just want to play very briefly to give you a sense for the kind of Luddite communication tool which has become emblematic of the Occupy Wall Street movement. It's called a people's mic, and here is a little video of a 4-part people's mic. Whoops. Okay.
Let's practice the people's mic, and some signals.
Okay, we're not going to see it. So, I won't do that. On to the Occupy movement and its relationship to demands and public policy. It's no coincidence that the movement emerged in New York City. The city is home to the headquarters of a number of the institutions that were directly involved in the financial crisis and its resolution, including AIG, Bear Stearns, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, Lehman Brothers, JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, MetLife, and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, where the open market operations to stabilize the international and national financial systems were conducted in 2007 and 2008. By the spring of 2011 in New York, the international and national dimensions of the crisis had suffused the climate of local politics and focused on an annual ritual of struggle over the city's budget. The budget battle was being presented by the mayor, and threatened were public facility closures, layoffs of city workers, and cutbacks to service agencies that were dependent on funds from the city. all during a time when the amount of the budget devoted to debt servicing was rising. So the budget under debate included not a single proposal for tax increases, and in a departure from previous year's budget battles, which had become a political ritual in the city, the usual coalition of labor unions, service agencies, nonprofits, and liberal think tanks that were unified in 2011 as the May 12th Coalition for a big demonstration organized on that day, were joined for the first time by activists organized horizontally through the Uncut movement in the new coalitions in New York's less affluent neighborhoods that were organizing people's town halls and so-called action assemblies. These were a direct attack on the town halls organized by politicians, which were seen as just public relations events for them to pick who they wanted to speak and the issues that they wanted to speak about. The demands of this group were laid out in a manifesto entitled It's Payback Time, which was prepared largely by the Fiscal Policy Institute, Good Jobs New York, and the Center for Working Families, which are all liberal public policy think tanks. They crafted a set of subsidy, taxation, and legal reforms that were designed to bring about $1.5 billion for that year back into the city budget and to rein in the socially destructive behavior of the 6 largest banks doing business in the city. So these reforms included eliminating over $1 billion of subsidies, tax credits, and low-cost energy deals to JP Morgan, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley, and were demanding something like $300 million in concessions and clawbacks for missed job targets. So the report in the coalition highlighted the fact that New York City is the inequality capital of the United States. And this claim was substantiated by the Fiscal Policy Institute, which published a report called Grow Together or Pull Apart in late December 2010, showing that they used the work of Piketty and Sayers, who attributed the sharp rise in U.S. inequality after the 3-decade boom following the Second World War to political decisions that altered the direct taxation of wealth and income. So what the Fiscal Policy Institute did was to use fiscal data from the state of New York and the city of New York to show that New York State is the most polarized among the 50 states, and that New York City is both more polarized than the state overall and also the most polarized among the 25 largest cities in the United States. Moreover, other parts of the report showed that top income earners in the city pay a substantially smaller share of their income in taxes than the other New Yorkers. And the idea that was advanced by the coalition was that inequality was the key problem faced by the city after 2008, and that it was not the inevitable outcome of markets, but rather a policy choice regarding the institutional framework within which those markets operated. And this was what determined the distribution and concentration of wealth. The message being pushed was that inequality could be managed downward with the right demands and a strong coalition of political partners backed by a strong citizens movement, and this was the message promoted by the leaders of May 12th. Coalition partners used to this annual ritual were not surprised when both sides made concessions. The mayor always demands cuts that he intends to give back, and the other partners fall off when their own demands are met. But the activists who were initially attracted to the campaign from Uncut and the people's town halls were frankly very alienated by this political process that they were new to. And from their perspective, the unions, the city-funded agencies, and the other big players in the coalition were too quick to back away from their demands, and therefore they were seen as being complicit in an outcome that remained socially unjust because it failed to really address the challenge of managing growing inequality in the city. So directly addressing this perspective is an essay by University of Berkeley philosopher Judith Butler, and this is called So What Are the Demands? And this is in a publication put out by one of the working groups of Occupy Wall Street in a publication called Tidal. The idea is that what are the demands is based on a presumption that to be legitimately political, a movement has to have both a list of demands and demands that can be satisfied. Now, the General Assembly has a vast number of working groups. I've had a number of people ask, isn't the Occupy movement suppressed It's not in the streets right now, but it's meeting every day. Hundreds of activists in New York City are meeting every day in all kinds of spaces in different working groups. One of the working groups that was active in the fall was a demands working group. It discussed a variety of demands and even sought to have some of them, such as a full job or a full employment for all demand, ratified by the General Assembly. But this proved ultimately impossible for them. Some of the demands pursued, which Butler refers to in this essay, are central to the concerns of the movement. These are demands like decreasing unemployment, repudiating student and other debt, stopping foreclosures. But what she points out is that these demands, however worthy they are, and however much effort people put into them, doesn't explain how they're all related. And the movement of the 99% against the 1% reveals that such demands only address facets of inequality. And since the central concern of the movement is to draw attention to and resist rising inequalities of wealth, it can't really count as one demand among many. What is